Thank you, Harsh. That was very insightful. Hello, everyone. I'm Nipun Mohanty. I'm the Director for Customer Success North America for Seclore. The next guest that I have with me is Derick Burton. Derick is the Head of Information Security and Risk Management at Clarien Bank. Welcome, Derick. Nice to have you, and thanks for accepting our invitation.
Thank you.
Derick, can we start by knowing a bit about you?
Sure, of course. So my name is Derick Burton. I have been working in information security and risk for almost my entire IT career, which takes us back to the mid 90s. I've had the good fortune to work in the UK, the US, countries in Europe, as well as the Caribbean and Bermuda. During that time, I've worked in a range of industries: oil and gas, finance, telecoms, and smaller sort of legal and mom and pop firms. And I've had experience with various regulation from different parts of the world. So it's been an interesting ride.
Wonderful. That's a lot of experiences that you bring with yourself.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for that. Can you share something about Clarion Bank?
Sure. So Clarien Bank is one of four banks on the island of Bermuda. It's the largest independent bank, and we aim to provide our mission statement, which is to help our customers navigate their financial future. We do this through a process of teamwork, integrity, and customer focus, and we're always looking for the best outcomes that we can give for our clients.
Wonderful. Thank you. So let's talk about the DRM journey, Derek. So what were the issues or scenarios that prompted you to look at a DRM solution?
So, over the course of the information security career, I've seen a change in focus. Once upon a time, security was at the perimeter, and you had that soft interior. But now, more and more, we're looking at data-centric security. And so the reason for that is you'll see from that simple threat model that we put up that you experience a situation now where customers are creating data or employees are creating data. They're storing it on servers, they're sending it by email, they may be putting it onto DVD or thumb drives. And at any of these points, the data becomes vulnerable to malware, to malicious users, and even human error. And I think human error is probably really the most important one, because the person is the most important part of the security chain, and they're also the weakest link. I mean, all the security you put in place, and then your finance director emails out the company finances to the wrong person. It's a mistake. It happens. We've all done it. But once he's done that or she has done that, you can't recover that data. So we really wanted to look at solutions that could take us beyond that perimeter and really look at how we can control the data once it's outside of our network.
Yeah, go ahead.
So yeah, and you'll see here that really brings us to digital rights management. So you have that necessity where your user creates a document or the data and sends it out, but you want to still be able to authorize and authenticate that user. So you're really looking at some kind of cloud-based or server-based rights management system whereby once the end user takes that data and wants to access it, they have to be challenged for identity, and their permissions to the data need to be checked. And so that really brought us into that digital rights management space, and hence to Seclore.
Perfect. So can you enlighten us more about what made you choose Seclore over other technologies?
Of course, sure. So you saw briefly the threat model that we put up at the beginning. Now, we actually ran through maybe half a dozen of those different threat models for data use scenarios, and that gave us probably 15 to 20 requirements between functional and non-functional requirements. We went out to market and we reviewed maybe four, I think, other products, and we put them against the set of requirements we had. And that brought us down to two, Seclore being one. And we put those two products into kind of a head-to-head for usability, for meeting the requirements, for ease of use. And that really brought us to Seclore. I mean, some of the capabilities, the single click, the ease of use, being able to give files to non-technical clients and they can still view it without having to download a client and client. But yeah, so at the end of that, Seclore was the one that we felt best matched our needs as a company and the needs of our partners and clients.
Perfect. Thank you for your business, Derek. So
Like,
let's talk about some of your business cases and how is Secure helping you get some value at Clarien Bank?
so I think the largest use case we found and probably the best one was to deal with that issue of data leaving the organization via email. I mean, people still send documents by, thumb drives, they upload it to sites, but email is really the primary mechanism by which we send data out. So what we wanted to do was to look at how we could protect that data as it leaves the organization, even when the end user hasn't elected to apply a control to it. And so what we did is we said, well, how are we going to go about that? Well, first of all, we need to understand the confidentiality or the security requirements for the data. And so that brought us to data classification tools. So we very much looked at the marketplace. We looked at the partners that Seclore worked with. And we settled on a product from a company called Bolden James. What that allows us to do is to classify documents according to their sensitivity as they're created. So again, just remove that extra step from the from the employee, and allow them to classify that document as it's being created based on keywords, based on phrases, based on the content, not whether or not the user thinks it should be classified, but what is the content is and predefined rules. Now, once you then apply those content labels to the data and we sent it out through our mail system, we implemented a mechanism to read the labels. And if there was sensitive data according to the label, we directed that to a Seclore mail gateway, which then applied the appropriate policy as the mail left. So that meant we could send documents out and we could say, okay, only the recipient is going to receive permissions for this document. Maybe the recipient is only going to receive permissions to access a document for a week, or maybe we're actually going to block this particular type of document from leaving entirely. So that really gave us the flexibility to deal with that step of the user not being able to correctly identify or not apply the controls that we had. So we then took that a step further, and this is where we found that it was really quite interesting. Your customers will probably be familiar with data privacy legislation like GDPR and regulation like PCI DSS. So one of the things that we found when we talked to some of our partner banks is that customers were sending emails inbound with credit card data in them. My credit card's not working. Here's the number. Please, can you help me? And in order to remain compliant with PCI DSS, the banks were bouncing those emails. They weren't accepting them inbound because they didn't want card data in their mail system, and now they're no longer PCI compliant. So we said, that's not a great outcome for the customer. The customer is sending you this data because they need something. So we then said, well, you know what? We can take this process we have of protecting data as it leaves and apply the same thing in reverse. So what we did is, as the emails were coming in, we used our mail gateway to identify any card data or particularly sensitive data, and then direct that mail to the Seclore gateway where it had appropriate permissions applied to it so that it could be read by the recipient and stored on the mail servers in an encrypted format, meaning that we were no longer at risk of breaching PCI, GDPR, or the Bermuda Privacy Information Protection Act, which is particularly relevant for us. And that, gives you that real client focus that Clarien as an institution looks for, because, your client's reaching out for help. Why would you bounce a message and tell them that you can't help them? So Seclore really helped us to deliver on that as an aspiration.
Wow, that is very, very interesting, and I'm sure a lot of our audience here will find this example very, very useful in their environment. Thank you, Derek. That's very innovative. Any other use cases that Secure helped with?
Yeah, so there were probably two or three. I mean, mergers and acquisitions was always an interesting one. You have highly sensitive documents, and you have teams of people who are working quite closely on this. But the documents need to be shared more widely. So you might have a pair of executives who are working out the details of a merger, but that document needs to go to legal. Well, I don't know whether or not or who the people are at your side who are in the legal team. So again, with Seclore, what happens is the document is sent onward, and as the person tries to open it, they're required to identify themselves using their email address. I get an automatic notification that somebody is attempting to access that document. I can then reach out and say, is this person supposed to have access? And if they are, I can grant it. And if they're not, they didn't have access in the first place. So it's a real win in terms of being able to maintain the privacy and the confidentiality of very sensitive data. And this applies very much for the legal team as well. It's the same kind of thing. Documents, cases, they need to be shared, but they need to be shared to very restricted audiences. And when they need to go outside of that audience, somebody has to be notified and somebody has to authorize that process before it goes on. And then the one use case that I found particularly useful for myself in my organization is that I, for example, will interview a half dozen to a dozen people a year, sometimes for my team, sometimes supporting other managers. And for every one of those interviews, I will be given a resume. Now, the resume is going to include name and address. It's going to include gender, work history. Some people may put current salary in there, whether or not they have children. This is all fairly sensitive information. So now that information is sitting in my inbox and maybe there for weeks, months, years, if I haven't remembered to delete it afterwards. But with Seclore, the HR department can say, right, Derick needs this information for a week, three or 4 days before the interview and 1 or 2 days after to evaluate the answers. And at the end of that time, my access is automatically revoked. They don't have to do anything. I don't have to do anything. That file is no longer sitting unencrypted in my mailbox, breaching GDPR, Piper, or whatever other regulation that we have to be compliant to. So again, I think that's really a positive step forward for us as an organization.
Wonderful. Thank you, Derek. That brings us to the end of the session. Thank you very much for joining us and sharing your thoughts. This was very, very insightful.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to come along and share the thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks, Derek.